Pretty easily, or simplify it pretty easy, okay? But this is the exact same thing as sometimes, or actually most of the time, you'll see it as the square root of 2 over 27, okay? If it's like that, the part that I wrote down, that's very hard to simplify. You can still do it, but it's a whole lot easier when it's written like it's written in blue, okay? Does everybody notice that?
What if there's a negative in this?
Well, one of our rules is, so now that we've talked about that, that's been the same thing as this. All right, now I'm going to erase this part on the side. Okay? I want you to understand that, though. Those are same things are equal. Okay, now, let's simplify this out. Can we simplify the square root of 2? No, so that's just going to stay the same. Okay? Now, is there a perfect square that can go into 27? What is that perfect square? 9. And how many times does it go into it? Okay? Now, so yeah, we talked about 9 being a perfect square that can go into 27, and it goes into it 3 times. So, I got the square root of 9 times the square root of 3. Okay? So I've split that up. Now, let's simplify it again. What's the square root of 9? 3, okay. So now, and we can't simplify the square root of 3, so that's just going to drop right beside of it, okay? Now, like I mentioned before, we cannot have radicals in our denominator. Okay, that does not work. That square root of 3, we cannot have that down there. All right? Yes, sir. Okay, so like I said, you can have that square root of 3 down there. It's not going to work. So we need to multiply it by a term that we can get rid of it. Okay? Now, think about it like this. Okay? If we multiplied this denominator, okay, by the square root of 3, okay, if we just multiply it by that. What's going to happen, okay, so when we multiply it by the square root of 3, so if we had this, if we had 3, I'm going to write this at the top, times. Okay, I'm just going to write it on the top up here in red. If we did what I just said and multiply it by the square root of 3, okay, remember our rules. Okay, remember our review that we went over this morning, those four problems. When we multiply the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, we get 3 times the square root of 9. Guys, stop. It's really annoying. Seriously. Okay? Does everybody see that? I multiplied it by the square root of 3. So 3 times 3 gives me 9, and that stays underneath that radical. Okay? What's the square root of 9? 3. And this would give me 9. Does everybody see that? Radical of the square root of 3 in our denominator. That cannot happen. That is not going to fly. All right? So now, let me write it below. So now up top, I have the square root of 2 times the square root of 3. Okay, that's in my numerator. And in the bottom, we just talked about that. We talked about the square 3 times the square root of 3 times the square root of 3. It's kind of a tongue twister. All right? We talked about that being, look up at the red, it's going to be essentially 3 times the square root of 9. Okay, so I'm going to multiply, let me point this out. Essentially, I multiplied all this out. Okay, I just rewrote it down here. Now, I'm going to multiply this 3 times this 3 because it's inside the radical, so that we can do that. Okay? I'm just going to keep the top. What am I going to do to the top?
Multiply.
I'm going to multiply these out, and I'm going to keep it underneath that radical. So I'm going to multiply 3 times 2. What do I get?
6.
The square root of 6, yes. That radical stays there, okay? Now, we talked about this, multiplying this 3 times 3. You get 3 times the square root of 9. All right? Does everybody see that? Now, after we do about 2 or 3 of these, you'll promise it'll make sense. Okay. Now, because we multiplied everything by the square root of 3 to begin with, okay, that was our very first step. Multiplying everything by the square root of 3. Look at our denominator now. What's the square root of 9? 3.
Did we just start this today, or did we do this?
Oh, everything's kind of tied in together so far.
Yeah, I was
Okay? So yeah, you just told me the square root of 9 is going to be 3. So up top, I got the square root of 6. And in the denominator, I got 3 times 3. Okay? Now, to simplify that answer, just multiply 3 times 3 in your denominator. Okay? And your final answer is going to be the square root of 6 over 9. Okay? Okay? So we got rid of our square root in our denominator. We got rid of that. That was our objective right there. That's what we did. Okay? Let's make this, it's going to be the same, yeah, it's a 9, sorry. This is going to be the same thing as the square root of 9 over the square root of 18. Okay? All I did was just kind of separate it so that I can simplify that 9 and that 18 a whole lot easier. Okay? Now, what's the square root of 9 up top?
3.
Yeah, it's going to be 3. So I'm going to write that over here. We've figured that out. Okay? So we handled our numerator.
You have to put 18. Just number.
Now,
Wait, why'd you scribble out?
I just had to write our new question right there.
You didn't like it?
Okay, now, we've tackled our numerator of the square root of 9. All that is 3. Now let's handle our denominator, the square root of 18. Okay? Okay, come back to class here. Okay. Now let's simplify the square root of 18. What's a perfect square that can go into that?
9.
9. Good job, Dalton. Good job, TJ. Okay? Yeah, it's 4. 9 times 2 gives me 18. So let's simplify this out. So we know that 9 times 2 gives me 18. Does everybody see that? All it is, simplify the square root of 18. All right? Now, what's the square root of 9? 3. Okay? Now, we can't simplify the square root of 2 anymore, so that just stays down there. Okay? Now, we need to get rid of that square root of 2 in our denominator. We need to get rid of that. So we need to multiply it by, we just talked about this, we need to multiply it by essentially itself. Okay, but don't worry about the 3. So we need to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root of 2. Okay, because I want to get rid of that square root of 2 in our denominator. All right? So, when you work that out, you're going to get 3. Up top, you're going to get 3 times the square root of 2. Okay? All I did was just multiply that out. All right? And then in the denominator, I got this 3 times the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. Cool? Following? Okay. Let's simplify that denominator. Let's multiply 2 times 2 down there. All right. So that's going to give you, good, whoever said that. Okay. That gives you 4. Yes, Zach. Okay. So we figured out that the square root of 4 is just flat out 2. Okay? Shh. Guys. Okay? Corbin, please. Okay? So we figured out the square root of 4 gives you 2. So now I'm going to multiply 3 times 2 in our denominator. And I'm going to get 6. Okay? Now, although we're not completely done, because can we simplify 3 over 6? Can we take that a step further? Yeah, to what?
2 over 3.
We can simplify it. 3 goes into 6
2 times.
twice. Okay, so you can simplify it as 1.
Dude, I was close, wasn't I?
Yeah.
I was pretty close. I was half. No.
Okay? So that would be your simplified answer.